We have some fans of Sigrid Nunez in the audience. Thank you for, yes. I'm delighted to see you all. Welcome to Pequot Library. I'm Stephanie Coakley, the Executive Director, and it's my honor to introduce this afternoon's Meet the Author program. We're just so honored to have our guest speaker, Sigrid Nunez, with us today in conversation with my distinguished colleague, Jessie McEntee. What a treat. Plenty of room, come on in. We couldn't host programs like this afternoon free of charge without the generosity of our sponsors and our individual donors. So I'd like to take this time to recognize those of you that are so kind to help Pequot Library keep offering the excellent programs that it does week after week. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to mention that if you are looking for a great party next Saturday, and you're interested in watching the greatest sport event of all time on a big screen here in our beautiful auditorium, join us for the Derby Day celebration that happens right here at Pequot Library. It's one of our largest fundraisers. Tickets are a little lower than we had hoped, so do consider joining us next Saturday. Today wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the support of the Westport Writers Workshop, and I see Liz in the audience. Thank you to your group just down the road for joining us in hosting Sigrid this afternoon. Thank you so much to the Westport Writers Workshop. Now, to introduce Sigrid. As you know, she's published 9 novels. A Feather on the Breath of God, The Last of Her Kind, The Friend, What Are You Going Through, and most recently, The Vulnerables. Sigrid is the author of Sempre Susan, a memoir of Susan Sontag that came out in 2011. Has anyone read that? Yes, great. The Friend, a New York Times bestseller, won the 2018 National Book Award and was a finalist for the 2019 Simpson Joyce Carol Oates Prize, among many others. In 2024, the New York Times listed The Friend among the 100 best books of the 21st century. The Friend has been adapted for film. No doubt many of you know about that. It came out just about 3 weeks ago by directors David Siegel and Scott McGehee. What Are You Going Through has been adapted for a film directed by Pedro Almodovar. The Room Next Door, 2024. Nunez's other honors and awards include a Whiting Award, a Berlin Prize Fellowship, the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award, the Rome Prize in Literature, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Wyndham Campbell Prize. Sigrid is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Among the journals to which she has contributed, The New Yorker, The New York Times, the New York Times Book Review, the Wall Street Journal, the Paris Review, the New York Review of Books, 3 Penny Review, Harper's, and the London Review of Books. Her work is included in several anthologies, including the 4 Pushcart Prize volumes and 4 anthologies of Asian American literature. Her story, The Plan, was selected for the Best American Short Stories in 2019. Her essay, Life and Story, originally published in the Swanee Review, was selected for the Best American Essays 2023. Her work has been published in more than 35 countries. Of all of the reviews of The Friend, one of my favorites is the Los Angeles Review of Books, who commented, "Everywhere in the novel, it is impossible to separate love and companionship from loss. The Friend is one of those rare novels that in the end makes your heart beat slower. Nunez has taught at Columbia, Princeton, and the New School, and has been a visiting writer or writer in residence at Boston University, Amherst, Smith, Baruch, Vassar, Syracuse, and the University of California, Irvine, among others. She lives in New York City. Nunez will be in conversation with my distinguished colleague, Jessie McEntee, who's a fiction and poetry instructor with our friends, the Westport Writers Workshop. A former book editor, Jessie has taught at the Westport Writers Workshop for nearly a decade. She also works here at Pequot Library as our amazing marketing associate. Jessie served as Westport's Poet Laureate from 2022 to 2024. Her 2 poetry chapbooks were both published by Finishing Line Press and are available on Amazon. Do check them out. Jessie is a brilliant poet. Before we welcome our guests to the stage, I do want to recognize our friend Craig Kennedy, who's in the back of the room from Barrett Bookstore in Darien. Sigrid will be available to sign books after the program. Without further ado, please join me in offering a warm Pequot Library welcome to Sigrid Nunez and Jessie McEntee.
This is such an enormous honor and delight to have you here in our historic library. Thank you so much for making the trip out from New York. And I want to start by laying down the gauntlet. I am your biggest fan.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't want to tell you while you were trapped in my car. That seemed a little too inappropriate. But I give myself an A+ for my fandom. So I don't know, maybe other people in the audience are like A's or B+, but I think I take the biggest. I'm going to give myself the biggest piece of cake on that one.
Thank you.
Of course, of course. And I'm going to tell a brief little anecdote that I swear relates to you. So I'm at the dentist yesterday. I'm having a filling redone, and I'm telling her all about how I'm doing this event, and she was like a B+ fan, but she was also, nevertheless a fan, and we go through the whole rigmarole, and I'm kind of like gasping and wriggling, and I'm really kind of terrified of this whole procedure, and at the end, she has me grind down on a little piece of paper, and I'm just like completely inept at this point. I can't do what she's asking me to do, and she turns to me and she goes, "I hope you're a really good poet." I was not going to make my living as a tooth grinder, apparently. So, and I bring this up because you're so very funny, and there's so many wonderful little vignettes within your stories with a lot of dark humor. And I was wondering, when did you discover that you were funny? Is it something that you cultivated? And when did you start to kind of learn to infuse your stories with such great humor?
It isn't really something that I gave thought to. I mean, I guess humor is a part of my personality, and not just when I write. And I like humor. I like people who are humorous. I like people who want other people to be humorous. But when I'm writing, I guess the last thing you would want would be. And now I've come to a place I should say something funny, because then it probably won't work. So I just, I allow myself, if I think of something humorous, if I think I have a good joke or something good to say that will make people laugh or smile, I'll put it in. And then, you always worry what would, the worst thing would be that's not funny, right? I mean, so you might think something is funny, et cetera, and it really isn't, or most people would think it isn't. So, but then you have your agent and your editor who are going to read it before it's published, and I figure then that's a safeguard. They will say that has actually happened to me once. It was a long time ago. It was one particular editor, and he had written in the margin, this falls flat, or this sounds flat, or whatever, and so then I took it out. But since that never happened again, I've come to think that it was really his problem. But, it was funny. I was funny. it was like he didn't have any sense of humor or something, right? But I wouldn't chance it. If the editor said this is not funny or this is flat, I would never chance saying, no, keep that in. Yeah. You really do need someone else to tell you.
Right, absolutely. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to focus mostly on your most recent books.
Good.
And we'll talk about the film adaptations as well. But so I'm switching gears. My questions are a little bit all over the place, and they're completely self-serving. So I hope the audience is interested in learning about the things that I'm interested in learning about. So I don't know if anyone has seen in this month's issue of The Atlantic, there's a review of Katie Kitamura's latest novel, and it talks about how for the past decade or so, there's been a movement among Katie Kitamura, Jenny Ofel, Rachel Cusk. They don't mention you, which I think is a huge omission, but they're writing female protagonists who resist or cannot define themselves in terms of their relations to other people. They're not mothers, they're not wives, often they're nameless, as are many of your protagonists. And yet invariably they're kind of pulled into human entanglements, as are your characters. On the other hand, last summer we had a big kind of cultural conversation about, say, Miranda July's novel, All Fours, where it was also a protagonist who was trying to kind of carve out a more autonomous identity for herself. But I don't know if everyone's familiar with that book. It's a little on the racy side. So she was kind of trying to self-actualize by new adventures. I'm just wondering, what do you think these novels say about the state of kind of middle-aged womanhood today? What do they tell us about autonomy and connection?
Well, I haven't read all those novels.
My daughter said that might be an issue.
I have read this kind of novel that you're talking about, and I am familiar with the trend. There are trends in fiction. So I don't know. I guess it just might have something to do with, with that it used to be that there was something that people call the domestic novel. Sometimes sort of disparagingly, because it just like sometimes they would call women's fiction, it would be disparaging to some extent. And in those, marriage was so central, the family was central. And I suppose this is maybe, pushing against that to some extent. Because, in Rachel Cusk, she does have, in real life, she has two daughters. In at least in the outline, she makes them two sons. And she just mentions them, but she is a mother, So, and I guess but because there's another trend of books which are very much about motherhood, but including memoirs. So I don't know if it really says that much about the cultural moment, except that it's that you have a group of writers and they're all around the same age, and whatever their life situation or domestic situation might be. They don't want to write a so-called domestic novel, and they want this this female narrator or female protagonist who is kind of trying to find herself in some way or her place in society. Because there's another kind of another trend, one that I actually identify more with in recent books. That I don't remember whether it was the critic Dwight Garner came up with the phrase, or when he was writing about Kate Royfey, or whether she actually came up with the phrase and he was quoting her, but I call it smart, or they call it, I use it, smart women adrift, which I guess these women are also that kind of work is also, could be called that. But yeah.
So in your three most recent novels, I almost feel like you're this, in the best possible way, it's almost like you're this genie who's kind of taking in what your protagonists want and giving them something so kind of fantastical or subversive, or in The Friend, right, she wants the ungettable man, and instead she gets the dog. In What Are You Going Through, I think maybe she wants to kind of dip in and out of other people's stories at will, and instead she finds herself embroiled in the story that, will not proceed without her. In the vulnerables, it seems to me like she wants solitude, or to kind of live on her own terms, but thanks to COVID and thanks to this kind of funky living arrangement, she offers to help a friend and ends up kind of in this claustrophobic situation, and she ends up with this companionship almost against her will. I'm wondering, how do you go about conceiving these protagonists, and do you start at the outset thinking like, well, this is what they want, so this is how I'm going to deny them what they want?
Well, that's very interesting. I always think that one of the best ways to define fiction writing is that, or a certain kind of storytelling is that you're trying to answer the question, what if? So a long time ago, I guess around 2010, I published a book called Salvation City, in which I tried to answer the question, what if there was a global pandemic of like the flu pandemic, like the great flu pandemic of 1918, and what if it took place, it was global, obviously, but what would it be like, particularly in these polarized times that we live in? So then when the pandemic started, and I said to my agent, didn't I write a book about this? And she said, you sure did, and it did not end well. But that was, it really came from that. I had always, when I first learned about the Great Flu, I thought, well, what would that be like, et cetera. So, on a much smaller scale, I start writing something or having some ideas, and then I think, well, what if someone you knew said, I have a terminal illness, I would like to leave this world on my own terms, I don't want to be in this terrible situation of pain, and I need somebody to be with me, and I'm asking you as my friend. So what if somebody, were to do that? And then with the lockdown, with the pandemic lockdown, I'm thinking now of my book, The Vulnerables. We all knew that because of it, a lot of people who would not normally have ended up sharing living quarters did, sometimes with people they didn't even know that well. That's just something that happened. So that didn't happen to me. But again, I thought, well, what if I were in one of those situations? And the thing is that with the friend, I started writing, I never had an idea to write, first of all, that's a book about a writer, because that's kind of a no-no. I mean, in fact, when I had showed a certain amount of it to my editor, very little of it, she said, I don't know a novel about a writer. I mean, everybody knows that that's just not something you should probably do. It's just really, so, but what happened is that I started writing, and then there was this narrator, and she was a writer, but I was writing along, and it wasn't until I was 30 pages into that book where one of the wives of the man who has taken his life, his most recent wife, she says, would you meet with me? Would you call me? I would like to meet. There's something I need to ask you. And it was only then when I thought, okay, now you've got yourself to this point, now you have to answer that question. Why does she want to meet? And that's when I thought, I could put a dog in the book. But it never started out, being about a dog. And then her being a writer, again, I didn't want to write about a writer being a writer. However, if I wrote a book about a doctor, I couldn't just announce she's a doctor. I'd have to show her doctoring. I'd have to show her seeing patients and having, medical ideas. You can't just, so it's the same thing. So I know what a writer does. I know how a writer relates to the reading that she does and so on. I had to build a certain amount of a literary life for this person. But again, as I say, it is always about, about answering this question, what if? And I kind of don't really think about, I did write a book about a woman who served in, I totally invented, about a woman who served as an army nurse in Vietnam. And that did start with that character. I want to write a book about one of these women who actually had this experience. I will have to research it, etc. And in another book, I did want to write a book about people who were young, who were undergraduates between 68 and 72, as I was, on a certain kind of campus, such as Columbia or Harvard, where there was a lot of activism. So that was someplace where an idea came up that wasn't exactly a what if. But that's usually how I come to the subject matter.
The 3 latest books also seem to be testing the limits of friendship. It's protagonists who are or want to believe themselves to be fairly insulated purposefully, and then they're kind of, again, pulled into these relationships based on the circumstances. Implicitly, I feel like there's something about their ages or their gender, or what is it about them that's making them vulnerable enough in this particular moment of their lives that they actually agree to these situations or scenarios?
I don't know. I guess if I don't quite, that would be sort of like overthinking in a way for me. If I knew, mostly it's just kind of like setting someone in motion. People sometimes ask, well, friendship seems to be, particularly important, to your fiction, and I guess because I'm somebody who hasn't been married, who's never been married, and who doesn't have any children, that relationship would be, would be more intense for me, would be more important to my life than it might be to someone else's. And then I remember it was really a very long time ago where I was with a group of writers, and one of the writers was talking about how the things that he felt writers didn't write enough about. And one of them was work. And that is still true. That strikes me as so true. Just about everybody has a job of some kind. Even very wealthy people work. People work. That's what people do. They have some kind of, profession or occupation. But it's very rare that you see that, in a novel where that's where that's what it's about. And there were now people write about motherhood, but it's not like there's some big major novel out there, Victorian novel or whatever, or modern novel where the subject is motherhood. Now, what could be more central to human experience than motherhood? And yet people don't, people didn't think, oh, here is a great theme, like war. War is a great theme for fiction. People didn't think motherhood was a great theme for fiction, even though you think it's kind of obvious, really. So now I've lost my train of thought. What was the point?
I've lost my train of thought, too.
Oh, okay. Oh, the friendship. The friendship is this, right? So one thing was work. Why don't people write more fiction about characters fully engaged in certain work that they do? And the other one was friendship. He said, and so since this was a discussion, then somebody said, well, there's a reason why there isn't more fiction as much fiction about friendship as there is about marriage and family. There's less at stake with friendship. And I guess, for me that wouldn't be true, but also I think that things have changed, that people don't feel that way so much. They feel like that there's a huge amount at stake. And then female friendship became something that women wanted to write about, and now there's quite a bit of it.
The film adaptation of What Are You Going Through, which everyone should see, it's wonderful. It's now called The Room Next Door in the film version. It was so incredibly lush. There was this gleaming, saturated color palette, and I found it so interesting because your prose is so spare, and you really are inviting the reader to come in and kind of imagine the setting for themselves. So how did that feel for you to see kind of your brainchild translated into a whole different medium through the eyes of a great director?
Well, I knew his work, and I was a huge fan. Am a huge fan of his work. So I sort of there were I knew at least visually what it would that would be. That it would have those qualities. Speaking of that film, which is actually now has just come to Netflix, the Julianne Moore character, perfect example of a smart woman adrift. She really captures exactly that. In my book, it's the character says, "Yes, I will go with you," to the Tilda Swinton character, just because she doesn't really know how to say no. And then she even changes her mind, but doesn't have the strength of whatever to say, "I've changed my mind," which is why she ends up there. Now, she does, it proves to have been for her and not just for the dying woman, a very good thing to have done. But she does stumble into it. She does, so I knew that it would look like that. The thing is that again, the female friendship. I also knew when I had. It was just kind of lockdown was lifting. Movies were open, so I remember I went alone to see Parallel Mothers, a movie of his that I love. And I came home and I checked my email, and there was this email that said, "Pedro Almodovar is interested in, acquiring the rights to What Are You Going Through?" And I thought, well, this is a little bit too much of a coincidence. Like, my phone must have been following me, and this is a trick. And it's going to say, "Click here for your tickets to the Academy Awards."
Yeah.
It was just too bizarre. But then immediately I thought, of course, these are his obsessions: the female friendship. Mortality, illness, getting older. These have been obsessions of his. We're about the same age, and and also I didn't know this, but assisted dying became legal in Spain in 2021, and he's a huge advocate of that. He thinks that countries that do not adopt that are barbaric. So all of that it made sense to me. So it wasn't, it's surprising how unsurprised I was by that film. There are decisions that he made that struck me as odd. We did meet well before he started making this movie to talk about it. And even then, at that very first meeting, he said, I have an idea for an additional character. I see her, I am calling her Michelle. And he did end up calling her Michelle. He always wanted to add this daughter because, again, that's one of his interests, the mother-daughter relationship. So actually, I felt that it's very different from the book, which I would have expected, but it's also very true to the concerns of the book.
It seemed like, at least in the beginning, there's more of an exploration of the two female leads, their backstories, and kind of the romantic overlap that they have. And I don't remember that being there in the book.
That is not, where did he get that from? He made that up. And then he totally made that up. And he also, he had talked to me about whether or not it was autofiction, and I had said that it was not autofiction. And he said, well, I call her Ingrid anyway. Because he sort of wanted it to be autofiction. And, there was that. And then I guess just another thing for me is that there's the John Turturro character who plays, he wasn't involved with both of those women. He was only involved with one of those women, with Ingrid. And in my book, he's kind of a cad. I mean, he has some wonderful qualities, but he is.
Most has too.
Almodovar made him heroic, or rather noble, or decent. Let's just say decent, very decent. And I wasn't sure about that. And I did a Q&A with Turturro and Julianne Moore at MoMA, and this came up in a Q&A, and they said, well, it's because Pedro identified, he would have behaved very well in a situation like this. And so this was the male character. He felt, he wanted it to be the way he would have behaved. Whereas it was really quite important to me that this situation, it was very, very specific, okay, that this ex of the narrator's, that he is helping her for a while. He's there. He's the only one that she tells what she's doing, that she's going away to do this, illegal thing. And he's supportive of her. He has nothing to do with the other character, but he's supportive of her. And then at a certain point, it's almost like he uses an excuse. She just says something very simple. He says, you have to remember when the police question you, you have to lie. And she says very simply, I worry that I might not be able to lie. I'll be so because of my emotion, my feeling. When I say she's gone and I'm calling you because, and he sort of explodes at her, says that it's just like her to be such an idiot. And then he walks out on those two women in that whole situation. Basically, he says, well, then I wash my hands of you. And for me, that captured, without making too much of a generalization, for me that captured a certain kind of heterosexual relationship, a certain kind of relationship between men and women, which I could describe as the woman wants the man to be there, he is there, he's doing everything right, she needs him, it's all going, etc. And at a certain point, he leaves. He's gone. He can't, for whatever, it just becomes too much. And again, I don't mean to generalize or even psychologize, but that's really what I was after. And he eliminated that from this story entirely.
I think it's so interesting that he had a specific name, Ingrid, that he was really tied to, but you frequently don't name your own protagonist.
Yeah, I didn't. That was one of the things with both of these books that became films that there are no names in either of those except for the dog and one other very minor character. But you can't make a movie without names. And so I just sort of wondered what names, I just waited to see what names they would come up with. And with Almodovar, he wanted to name Ingrid because he identified that character with me, but he couldn't use Sigrid. And he named the Tilda Swinton character Martha as a kind of homage to the Martha Gellhorn, because he also made her a war journalist, a war correspondent, which of course she is not in my book.
By not naming your characters, does that kind of, for you, does that maintain their autonomy or allow them to be more independent from you so that they can kind of do what they want? Or how does that work for you with the process of writing them?
Well, that's another trend. It's almost kind of silly. I don't know when this came up, but at a certain point it became, just like the trend of not using quotation marks around dialogue. What is that about? John Grisham was giving rules for writing, a man who knows something about writing successful books. He was giving rules for, etc. And at a certain point he said, and when it's dialogue, you put the quotation marks. And he said, come on, people, this is basic. Also, he couldn't figure out why did people, but it did become this, and so I started doing it because when I had the quotation marks in there, people complained. They said, that's so old-fashioned, take those out. All right, now I happen to be writing something now, and I'm putting those quotation marks in, and I'm giving those characters names because it was the same thing. It became this thing to not name the narrator. That's been fairly common, and that's different. But also not naming the characters. So then what happens is I'm writing The Friend. Was it The Friend. I'm writing The Friend, and I did have names for characters. And I was calling maybe this mentor character Richard. I seem to remember that. And it just wasn't working. I had the names didn't really feel real. They felt kind of fake, and I got a little blocked. So then I took the names out, and then I was able to carry on. So they were, for whatever mysterious reason, they were in the way. But I don't have a philosophy about not using names. And And then it's very interesting because the Anna Burns, who right around the same time won the Booker, I guess, and for the book Milkman, and she was being interviewed, and somebody said, why do the characters not have names? And she said, well, it's interesting because I actually did have names, and then I got blocked for some reason, so I took the names out, and then it was okay. So I realized this is not an uncommon feeling about naming characters at this moment of literary creation.
That's so interesting. Another kind of curveball question. So I think you asked this question actually in The Friend, and I'm curious about, I know what your character's response was, but I'm curious about your response. What life experience is it necessary to go through in order to achieve artistic greatness?
Wait, so where does that come from?
I thought it was in The Friend. Or it's either The Friend or What Are You Going Through? What life experience is it necessary to go through in order to achieve artistic greatness? The response in the book was failure.
Oh, I see. Because the reason why I didn't get it is because I was actually quoting somebody. Oh. Yeah, or I invented this on a questionnaire or something. Because that doesn't sound like me.
I'm putting words in your mouth.
Or maybe it was a question. Wasn't it a question asked of the Nobel Prize winner? That I don't remember which one, but that was it. They asked the Nobel Prize winner, whichever one it was. It wasn't Annie or no. It might have been Faulkner because he's in there. What does it take? And the answer was failure.
Is that your answer as well?
Yeah. No. That's why it's in there because I do think it's true. And there's a whole little section in the book about failure, that it's from both in life experience and in writing and creating something. It's from attempting and then failing that you learn things, that you learn how to do it right or how to make progress or how not to do certain things. I mean, if there wasn't any failure, you would just be going along in some route that, and also that you, that the failure really, it teaches you everything. There's another quote in there that I used that said that, Success changes you into another person, whereas failure makes you who you essentially are. So I think it's just this thing that failures that you have, and they can be little failures, failures from grade school, and then other failures that how you respond to them and how they change you and how you move on from them. It seems to me that everything of great importance is really there, and I don't understand how you could actually achieve a great work of art if there wasn't failure along the line, and if you didn't sort of accept that as something that should happen. It just seems so bizarre to me that anybody would just, start and everything's great, and then there's this great work. It just doesn't make any sense. Just like a life, like a parent, I was always a perfect mother. I was as the baby was born, it was easy, it was all good, and it's always been good, and it's just great. No, we've never had any problems. I've just always done the right thing, said the right thing. I mean, life doesn't work that way, and art is like life.
So many of us, I think, carry around this impression, at least that's a writer of your ilk, that you gestate these stories and it's just a matter of finding the time to kind of sit down and they probably flow out of you seamlessly. But do you still have projects that are kind of stillborn that you end up abandoning, or how does that work? Like for every fully realized novel that you come up with, how many kind of starts and stops are there? I mean, I guess it's different case by case.
Well, the reason why there aren't as many starts and stops for me as there would be for another writer is that is the kind of process that I have, which is that I get something down and then I kind of creep along with it, one foot in front of the other, step by step. It's not like I have a grand idea and then write an outline or do a first draft and then realize it's not going to work. I am working with such little material step by step that what isn't going to work shows itself as failure very early on. So I haven't, at least now later in life, I don't have I find the whatever the problem is occurs to me early on, so I don't have, whole works that haven't worked that I've decided that just was not a good idea, and it's not working. Yeah.
So it sounds like you follow that kind of famous E.L. Doctorow quote that he talked about writing only. It's looking at the headlights are illuminating the night, and you can only see as far as the headlights.
Yeah, and I think that's lucky because there are writers who really would not be able to do that. That's just not the kind of writer they are. They have to get it all down. They have to. I mean, I even have known of writers who keep dossiers of each character, and in the dossiers are information that they're never even going to use, but they need to do all that work, even down to what kind of toothpaste a character, because that's the way it comes alive to them. But I just have to, just thinking about that, making dossiers for characters and outline, I'm already tired. I quit already. That just seems like so much to me. But I guess the joy of it, for certain writers, that would be part of the joy of it.
What contemporary authors inspire you and why? What do you look for in a great novel?
I don't know. I actually don't think in terms of whether it's a great novel or not, or even if it works completely. What I'm interested in mostly really is the is the language, is the way it's written. I can hear that about a book that and will trust what I'm hearing, that it's a really great, meaningful work with a great plot, whatever, great characters, and then I will start to read it, and to my way of thinking, it's not well written. It's either overwritten or it's just things are wrong with it from my point of view, and then I don't want to read it. I don't want to go on to the next page. It's really what really impresses me as I've said in answer to this question is that the right words in the best order. I mean, that's what I'm looking for. That's what really thrills me. And then just whatever ideas the writer might have, whatever observations their narrator might have, when you're reading a book, you're in somebody. I forget who said this. It's like borrowing somebody else's brain, right? So you're reading a book for a while. You're in somebody else's consciousness, in their brain, in their thoughts, and that's what has to be interesting to me, more than. This is a great story that illuminates the way we live now in some big, and then some larger sense. But I like when people sometimes ask about influences, what work has influenced you, and it's very hard for me to answer because, like most writers, I read all the time, and just about everything has some kind of influence on what I'm writing. There aren't these sort of major people, I do have some sort of favorite writers, but I don't, in a way. I like literature, and then also I think that books are so different. Writers and books are so different from one another. That it's also hard to pick and say what is a favorite or what is greater than, I don't really believe, I'm going to have to do a podcast with somebody at Yale about The Great Gatsby, and I haven't read it for many years, so I'll be rereading it, but I remember having trouble with it when I read it for the first time. I wasn't young, I wasn't, people read it in high school. I didn't read it until the year 2000, because I was teaching at Smith at the time. And it was actually quite disappointing to me. It's an extremely beautifully written book, but I don't think it's a great book. Not in the way that it's been pushed at us, right? Okay, and then I think, well, it's because there's no such thing as the great American novel. I mean, that's really pretty silly, but if there is such a thing, that book can't be it. it's not big enough. I mean, it's too narrow. And so I don't know, like, then this has become this thing, like, it's the great American novel. This totally puzzles me. I'm really looking forward to reading it again. And when it came out, I know, like, the reviews were not good. They were kind of dismissive. And there was H.L. Mencken who said, it's just a glorified anecdote. It's not even a novel, right? So like there is another view. It was also Gore Vidal who said it's a beautiful little book, but it's not a masterpiece. Nevertheless, it has this reputation, and I just want to figure out why it has that reputation, because I don't actually think it's real. Yeah. Anyway, so my point is, like, I don't really think there is any such thing as the great American novel, and I don't see how there could be, because all these American novels are so completely different from each other. You can't actually have one heading.
Yeah, I always wonder. Well, my daughter, I think, would share in your Gatsby assessment. She just had to read it for school.
I will remember that I will tell Yale.
Yes, Sadie McEntee declared that it was not the great American novel. I wonder about that too. I mean, it's almost like it's so removed from the story because it's from Nick Carraway's perspective. He doesn't have skin in the game. He's just a bystander, and he says that he's not involved, even though he does stir the pot. But maybe if it were even more of, like, if he were more of an actor or one of the central figures who's kind of, if he were Gatsby, maybe it would be a different.
Maybe it's. I mean, and I am a Scott Fitzgerald fan, and he is, this terrific writer, and the language, as I say, language is important to me, is extraordinary. But anyway.
Well, you lead me into another question. Maybe I'm wrong on this one. It seems to me like Scott Fitzgerald is kind of maybe one of the rare kind of big writers who was actually more of an insider than an outsider. And I know that because, there's kind of a clubbiness, or it feels to me like he would have been cool in school. And you talk about being more of an outsider. You're the children of immigrants. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how construing yourself as an outsider has kind of how that's affected you with your writing career.
I'm not sure. By outsider, what do you mean?
Oh, I thought you yourself said you.
Did I say that?
You thought of yourself as an outsider, as the children of immigrants, and just kind of having.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I meant outsider quite in that way. I guess, yeah. I'm not really sure how to answer that. I am the child of immigrants. But that's I don't think that immigrants or children of immigrants necessarily consider themselves outsiders. I mean, in America, right? But I do think that if there's a way that I'm an outsider, I think it would have more to do with the attitude that I had about my work. Okay, in the sense that. Most writers I know, they also teach, and they sought to get positions with some institution, which takes away a certain amount of freedom, right? And so for me, I never, and they also have families for the most part. So that's really what I was thinking about with the outsider, that I was somebody who kind of didn't want to have other things happening. I wanted to write, and I set up my life so that these other things would not take my time away from that, and that's very unusual. And so I did manage to teach, quite a bit, but never with any kind of security. I mean, it was always moving from place to place. I never applied for a teaching job, actually. I would always just accept invitations, and then I would be able to stay for a while and move around and so on and support myself in this minimal way. I was content to live in a very small space, to not, and to not have certain needs that other people had. And all of that was about making the work central, because there was no way to know, or it would have been foolish to think that, that I could be so successful as a writer that I wouldn't, all these years I wouldn't have to do anything else. I mean, I was willing to work, but the work was always to serve the writing. And that, that did put me in a different kind of position from other people. And it was also because of that I made decisions about being with people, about whether or not to have children and so on, all of those things.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now?
Yeah, there's something in The Vulnerables where I quote Faulkner as having said, he answered the question, why did you become a novelist? And he said, well, I started by writing poetry and I couldn't do that, I was no good at that, so I moved on to short stories, no good at that, so the only thing I could then do is become a novelist. And this is something that not novelists who are honest with themselves know that this is very true. It is really much harder to write good short stories than to write novels. So I had written stories throughout my career, and I have enough of them that I do have a book of stories coming out in summer 2026. But the reason why I have that is because about a year ago, I started writing a story, and then another story came, and another, and I like those stories. They seem to me better than the stories I used to write. And I thought, well, maybe I had to write, 9 novels in order to learn how to write a short story. This might be what's happening. So I have been writing some stories, and I just finished another one that for the Yale Review. Well, I have a story coming out in the Yale Review, and then I've written another one specifically for them, which is going to come out in September in connection to the Wyndham Campbell Award. And then while I was writing those stories, I started writing, I just started writing something that I now think I will be turning into a novel, a short novel. So I am embarked on a new novel.
That's wonderful news for all of us. Thank you so much. This has been really fascinating.
Thank you.
I'd love to open up the floor to questions. Oh.
Jessie, before I pass it over to the audience, I have a question for you. In our introductory remarks, I neglected to mention the numerous novels that you have written, in addition to being a successful poet. But please tell us a little bit more about what you've written and what you're doing at the Westport Writers Workshop.
Sure. Well, thank you. I teach poetry and fiction classes at Westport Writers Workshop, and it's a wonderful experience. It's lots of fun. My classes, I'd like to think, are lots of fun. My writers go around, they read 5 double-spaced pages a week, and we give feedback on the fly about what's working, any blind spots, and just kind of help to develop. I think implicitly you understand that if someone is not responding to your humor, that maybe that's not your strong spot, but that that's something to develop. And then the next person reads and they get lots of chuckles, so you think oh, okay, maybe that's another way of going about it. We kind of collectively develop skills without lambasting each other or ripping each other apart overtly. So I've written 11 novels. I share in your protagonist's dim view of publishing. I don't yet have an agent, so but I have a growth mindset, so I don't yet have an agent, but one of these days. And I am working on another novel right now that is kind of inspired by it's about an affair between an artist and a much younger woman. So I think there's an interesting power dynamic going on there. But I write poetry in between my novels. I don't want to say it's a palate cleanser, that's so demeaning, but it's more of instead of committing to a novel it's a way of just kind of like still remaining active without feeling like, oh my gosh, here's the next 2 years of my life.
Hi, thank you for being here today, and I'm here with some members of my book club, and we're reading your book, The Friend, right now. So when we saw that you were going to be here, we came up to be here today. And my question is, did you ever have a dog, or do you have a dog now? Because you write so beautifully about that relationship between a human and dog.
Well, I did have a dog. I was right out of college. I got a puppy that was half Great Dane, half German Shepherd, and I mention him in the book. I call him Bo in the book. See, he got a name. He got a name. But it's funny because that's not his real name. And so why did I do that? It's like I gave him a different name to protect his identity. Yes, I didn't grow up with dogs, and I really think of myself as a cat person. But I did have that dog, and I don't have a dog now, and I haven't had a dog for a long time. So, because as I say, that was like when I was in college. And my sister had a Great Dane, but by that time, we were no longer living at home, and so I hardly ever even saw him. But I do love dogs, and I do like observing animals a lot. And I did discover from writing this book and other things that I've written that I really, really enjoy writing about animals. It really gives me enormous pleasure.
Well, we hope you'll write another one.
Okay.
Susan Hood, local famed author.
Yeah, I was just very interested to see how you got your start in writing. Did you write as a child, or did you have a teacher who really encouraged you? And if so, what did they do to do that?
I did start writing as a child. It was all. I think I always wanted to be a writer, and it was really. It was very direct. I mean, like I was a child, and the thing that I loved best was to be read to. I could not read myself yet, and I've said this in a few places that like I would follow my mother around and try to get her to stop whatever she was doing and read to me, and I could not understand how doing housework could have been more important than reading to me. I still feel that way. All right, so I would do that, and then I learned. So I loved that, and so those were like fairy tales, children's books about talking animals, whatever. And then as soon as I learned how to read, that was my favorite activity. That was like to me it gave so much. So it to me it sort of it was a completely natural experience that then. I would want to do that thing that made me so happy that other people had done and put into books. And as I recall, from elementary school, junior high school, and high school, I was always encouraged. I mean, there were always these literary activities. There was you came early, before school started to do the poetry club, and there was always a literary magazine, and we were always being asked to make up stories. And I was encouraged. I did get the impression that I was one of the students that was doing that well. So, it wasn't until I got to college that I actually, that was the thing. Immediately, I thought I was going to be a poet, and the first course that I took, as a first semester, the first writing course I took was poetry, and it was just this colossal failure. It was a nightmare. It was absolutely terrible. I was like, the worst student in the class, and everybody let me know. It was a really terrible experience. In fact, I can tell you what, think about, I was 17 years old. I have never written a poem since, and I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't think of it. You could say that was that teacher. That was a very destructive experience. You could say, but then what I did is I immediately moved into the fiction workshops, and there again it was very, very mixed. I was studying with Elizabeth Hardwick, and it was like, there were good things, but there was a lot of discouragement, but I knew that this was what I wanted to do, And I guess the most encouraging thing for me was when I was writing, when I am writing, I always feel like I'm doing what I should be doing. There's just that. So then I did go, and do graduate school writing, and I just, kept on. I always felt that that's what I should be doing. And there was, years between leaving the graduate school, getting my MFA, and getting published was a long time, and that time was full of rejection. Just full of rejection. In fact, that's the only thing there was. And I guess that helped me know I really must have to be doing this or something, because even with all that, I'm still doing it, and it's still what I want to do.
Hi. So that was really interesting, and one of the most interesting things to me that you said was the point you made about the writing, and how important the way the words go together is in conveying anything. Your writing style is so distinct and so sort of often airy and free. I wonder, and as a longtime book editor, it's so important to me that people understand how the actual writing conveys what it is that the reader takes away. I wonder, when you're writing and when you were writing your different books, in order to create qualities of tone and style and that kind of thing, did you approach the way you put the words together differently for each of the different kinds of books that you were writing?
I think that the books that I've published, I think the style is pretty consistent. They aren't all written in the first person, and that makes a huge difference. But one of the reasons why it took me longer than, say, it might have to even get published or to be writing the way I thought I should be writing was that I was very influenced by Virginia Woolf. This was, a favorite writer. I read everything. She meant so much to me. And so there's this whole period of time when I was young where everything that I wrote was bad Virginia Woolf. And and I do not at all regret that happened, because I think there had to be something really, really wonderful and beneficial about immersing yourself so much that you read everything of this writer, you studied the language and all that, you tried to see how it was done, you tried to imitate it, and then at a certain point, you got out of that, you got over that. And I think from the time that happened, which was, I would say, when I started to write what became the part one of 4 parts of my first book, that was a different voice. That was different, and that was more natural to me. And I had found something that I could really, really say what I wanted to say. I had found the language, the tone, the style. And so there's been some variation, but basically that was it, I've had this fantasy that I sort of have wished that if life were longer and there were more time, that I could have experimented more, that I could have written something in a more Baroque style. I mean, another writer I greatly admired was Nabokov, and just the idea of writing something that was all about just how beautiful can you make this language, just what kind of imagery can you come up with, but that's really not. People have done it, but I there's just, as I say, you don't have that kind of time to have different literary lives. So I would say that once I started that first book, that was how I found my own voice and my own style, and I've stayed true to that.
One other comment. I was astonished when you were talking about Almodovar adding characters to your book, to the film. As an editor, you would never think of messing with somebody's writing like that, and yet you were okay with it.
Well, it's completely different. I mean, it couldn't be more different. The comparison that I like to make is, if your editor came to you and said, we're going to do an adaptation of your novel, right? And we're going to make some changes, but you would say, no, you're not. That's a crazy idea. I mean, no one would ever do that, right? But when people find out that some filmmaker wants to make an adaptation of their novel, they're very happy, right? I mean, because it's just not the same thing. So it never occurred to me. I do love movies, and it never occurred to me that any adaptation of mine, that it would be a transcription of the book. I mean, I don't even think there's such a thing as a movie of a book. The book is there, it's still there. The movie is somebody's idea of part of the book that they wanted to. So it never, in The Friend, they also added a character, also a daughter. Right. In both of my books, those daughters exist just by mention. They're mentioned. I mentioned this character has a daughter. For both of those filmmakers, they saw that they could make the movie they wanted to make by creating another relationship. And there seemed to me to be ample good reason to do that. So I would never object to that. I mean, I think that if I objected to that, I would not sell the book. I mean, if I thought that it had to be exactly what I wrote, then there's no reason to have a movie, really. So yeah, that just was never an issue for me. And I also trusted, I trusted these people to make something that was meaningful and artful. I didn't think they were going to do anything to ruin or destroy anything that I had done. Yeah.
Wonder if anyone will do a novelization of the film of your book.
Right now they'll write a novel, exactly.
Anyway, anybody else?
One of my favorite.
You have to talk to Mike.
Okay. One of my favorite books in the whole world is a memoir of Susan Sontag. When I purged a bunch of books years ago, I kept that in my room.
People can't hear you.
Is this it? At
Yeah.
any rate, I just wanted to know if you had some comments about that memoir or how you feel about it now, and Susan Sontag.
So if you didn't hear the beginning, she was talking about the Sempre Susan, a memoir of Susan Sontag. So that book came out in 2011. Well, that book had an interesting history because I have to say it would never have occurred to me to write a book about Susan Sontag. I would never have thought to do that. But what happened was that somebody, a writer wanted to put together an anthology in which writers wrote about mentors. It didn't even have to be someone they knew. It could have been just a published writer that meant a lot to them, or a friend, or just somebody that, the book was called Muses, Mentors, and Monsters, 20 Writers on the People That Have Influenced Them. So I said, oh yes, I would like to write about Elizabeth Hardwick because she was my teacher at Barnard. And I was told you can't do that because 2 people are already writing about Elizabeth Hardwick. One of whom was Mary Gordon, the other one was Elizabeth Benedict, who both studied with her also. So then I thought, well, Susan Sontag, she was never my professor, but she was a profound influence. And so I wrote the 20-page piece, and then that was published before the book came out in a magazine Tin House. And there was a publisher at that time who had a small press called Atlas Books, James Atlas. And he saw it in Tin House, and then he asked me if I would consider writing a book. And I said, well, it depends on what you mean by book. I would have, that was 20 pages. I said, I guess I would have about another 100 pages or so of memoir of that time when I knew her. That I could do. And he said, well, that's actually, what I was thinking of, a short book. So I really, it was writing is always hard, but it was easier in the sense that I didn't have to invent anything. I just, had to remember. And it was kind of a wonderful experience to go back and think about all these things and remember her in those years and the New York Review of Books. And so I haven't read it in a long time, but I don't think my feelings about it have changed at all. I think I got down what I wanted to get down, and I think I was able to well, Elizabeth Hardwick used to say this all the time. You would say, I want to write about such and such, but how can I write about my parents, etc.? And her thing was, if you find the right tone, you can write about anything. And, this is one of the reasons why I revered Elizabeth Hardwick, is because she was always coming up with things like that. And it was true. I felt that I had found the right tone for that particularly, what was a sort of a difficult thing to write about. So I'm glad that you liked it.
This is like a relay. First of all, I want to thank Liz Matthews and our beloved library here in Southport for making this opportunity possible and to meet with you. I'm an avid book on Audible reader, and I wonder as an author how you feel about your book going from the printed to the Audible stage, and how much involvement you want or have in the choice of the voice. And I wonder, does it offend you when somebody wants to read Audible? And that's what I say, I read Audible a lot, but it fits into my lifestyle so well, and I love the ability to enhance the words with some visualization.
Well, it certainly doesn't offend me. I don't really have anything to do with that. I mean, at a certain point, not all of my books have an Audible version, and for the last three, though, for example, I remember when The Friend came out and they wanted to make the Audible version, and they sent me three audition tapes, as it were, said, which of these three voices, and I picked the one, and then I wanted to, I had the option, I thought, to stay with that person for the next one and the next one. I myself don't listen to audiobooks because that doesn't work for me. I'm not able to sustain the attention. I find myself going off, and I want to read the written word, and I haven't actually been asked if I want to read the books myself, though some authors are and some authors want to do that. But it's wonderful to have that option, which didn't exist before, and I know a lot of people who because they have a certain situation, like long drives, etc., where it's just perfect. So I'm very happy that it exists, and I don't feel like I need to interfere with that particular aspect of the publishing.
Thank you.
Well, Sigrid, Jesse, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you.